The fluorescent lights of the Jefferson County Courthouse hummed with an irritating persistence that matched the tension in room 247. 3-year-old Emma Martinez sat perfectly still in an oversized chair designed for adults, her tiny frame swallowed by the burgundy upholstery. Her legs, too short to reach the floor, dangled motionless in the air. In her lap, she clutched a worn teddy bear with one missing eye and a patch of fur stained dark, a silent witness to the nightmare that had shattered her world exactly 42 days ago. Emma's large brown eyes, once reportedly bright with the mischief typical of a toddler, now stared at the beige wall with the empty gaze of someone much older, someone who had seen too much, someone who had lost everything. Janet Rodriguez, Emma's temporary foster mother, sat beside her, periodically reaching out to stroke the child's dark hair, only to let her hand fall back to her lap when Emma showed no response. Janet had been a foster parent for 12 years, had cared for dozens of traumatized children, but Emma's case haunted her in ways she couldn't articulate to her husband. The child didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't throw tantrums. She simply existed, trapped somewhere between the living and a place no 3-year-old should ever know. Still nothing. Patricia Gomez, the social worker assigned to Emma's case, entered the room with yet another stack of manila folders. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor, a sharp sound that usually made children jump. Emma didn't flinch. Janet shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Not a word. She ate half a banana this morning, but her voice trailed off. What else could she say? That the child functioned like a tiny robot, accepting food when placed before her, allowing herself to be dressed and bathed, but never initiating, never responding, never truly present. Patricia set down the folders and knelt before Emma, bringing herself to the child's eye level. She tried this approach 17 times in the past 6 weeks. Emma, sweetheart, do you know why we're here today? Nothing. Not even a blink of acknowledgement. Patricia's heart clenched. She'd read the accident report so many times she'd memorized every horrific detail. The crash had happened on Interstate 70, just outside Denver. Detective Ricardo Martinez had been driving his wife, Maria, and daughter Emma home from a family dinner celebrating Maria's birthday. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed their Honda Civic traveling in the right lane at 9:47 p.m. At 9:48 p.m., a pickup truck driven by 34-year-old Brandon Walsh, with a blood alcohol content of 0.19, more than twice the legal limit, crossed the median at 83 miles per hour and struck the Martinez family head-on. Ricardo Martinez died instantly, his body positioned in a way that investigators later determined had shielded his daughter in the final microseconds before impact. Maria Martinez died during transport to Denver General Hospital. 3-year-old Emma Martinez survived with minor physical injuries, a broken wrist, bruised ribs, and lacerations that would heal. But the psychological injuries, those were catastrophic. Emma had been conscious during the entire ordeal. She'd watched paramedics work frantically on her father while trapped in her car seat, covered in blood, his blood, her mother's blood. She'd heard the sirens, the shouting, the terrible sounds of the jaws of life tearing metal, and somewhere in that chaos her young mind had simply shut down. The last words anyone reported hearing from Emma were in the ambulance when she'd cried for her daddy. Since arriving at the hospital, she'd been mute. Judge Morrison is ready in 15 minutes, Patricia said, standing up and addressing Janet. Both families are already in the courtroom. She glanced at Emma, professional concern etched across her features. I don't know how this is going to go. The judge wants Emma present, but if she can't communicate her needs, her wishes. Who even knows what she wants? Janet interrupted, frustration seeping through her usual patience. She's 3 years old and she just watched her parents die. What 3-year-old could possibly process that? The custody battle had become surprisingly contentious. On one side stood Sarah Chen, Maria Martinez's older sister, flying in from Boston with her attorney and a PowerPoint presentation on the benefits of Emma growing up in Massachusetts with her two older cousins. Sarah was a corporate lawyer, financially stable, lived in an excellent school district, and genuinely loved her niece. On the other side stood Miguel Martinez, Ricardo's younger brother, a firefighter from Denver. He was single, worked irregular hours, lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment, but he carried his late brother's badge in his wallet and could offer Emma something Sarah couldn't: proximity to her father's legacy, his colleagues, his city. The clinical psychologists had submitted their evaluations. Dr. Rebecca Foster's report concluded, Emma Martinez presents with severe traumatic mutism and dissociative symptoms consistent with acute psychological trauma. Until the patient demonstrates verbal communication and emotional regulation, determining her attachment preferences or environmental needs remains inconclusive. In other words, the expert opinion was useless. Patricia checked her watch. 12 minutes until Emma's future would be decided by strangers in black robes, by lawyers who'd never met Ricardo or Maria Martinez, by a system that meant well but often felt cruelly inadequate. "Let me try one more time," Janet said softly. She knelt beside Emma and gently turned the child's face toward her own. Emma's eyes focused somewhere beyond Janet's shoulder, as if looking through her rather than at her. "Emma, baby, I know you're scared. I know everything hurts. But today we're going to go into a big room where a nice judge, like a teacher, kind of is going to decide where you'll live, with Aunt Sarah or Uncle Miguel. Do you understand?" Emma's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The blood-stained teddy bear remained crushed against her small body. "Nothing." Patricia gathered the files and nodded toward the door. "We need to go. Judge Morrison doesn't appreciate delays." As Janet lifted Emma from the chair, the child's body limp and compliant, none of them could have possibly predicted that in less than 30 minutes, everything would change. That a four-legged officer of the law would accomplish what weeks of therapy, medication consultations, and professional interventions could not. That 2 whispered words would crack open a case everyone had believed was hopeless. The hallway outside room 247 stretched before them, a corridor that would lead Emma Martinez toward either continued silence or an unexpected miracle. Officer Michael Chen adjusted his duty belt as he walked through the south entrance of the Jefferson County Courthouse, his K-9 partner Justice trotting obediently at his left side. The 3-year-old German Shepherd's ears swiveled constantly, cataloging every sound in the busy building, footsteps echoing on marble floors, hushed conversations between attorneys, the electronic beep of security scanners. "Big day, boy," Chen murmured, his hand briefly touching Justice's head. They were assigned to courthouse security for the Hendricks trial, a high-profile robbery case that had attracted media attention and required additional K-9 presence. It was supposed to be routine: sweep the courtrooms, maintain a visible presence, deter any potential disruptions. Chen had been a K-9 officer for 5 years, but his partnership with Justice was relatively new, just over 2 years. Justice had been transferred to him after the dog's previous handler, Officer David Remington, retired following a shoulder injury. The transition had been seamless. Justice was what trainers called a natural, intelligent, focused, possessing an almost supernatural ability to read both his handler and the situations around him. The German Shepherd had been cross-trained not just in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension, but also in victim assistance and courthouse comfort work. It was an unusual combination, but Justice had proven himself exceptional at both the aggressive and gentle aspects of police work. He could take down a fleeing suspect one moment and comfort a traumatized witness the next. "Officer Chen," Deputy Marshal Tom Brewster waved from the security checkpoint. "Trial's been delayed. Technical issues with the prosecution's video evidence. You're on standby for at least an hour." Chen nodded his acknowledgement. "We'll do a floor sweep then, keep Justice active." They started on the third floor, walking the long corridors past courtrooms with names like Family Court Division B and Civil Proceedings Room 8. Justice performed his job perfectly, his nose working systematically, his posture alert but not aggressive. Other courthouse staff smiled at the dog as they passed. Justice was well known in the building, a favorite among the regular employees. As they approached the family court wing, Justice's demeanor suddenly shifted. Chen felt it immediately through the leash, a subtle change in tension, a slight pull to the right. The dog's gait altered from his standard patrol walk to something more purposeful. His ears, which had been casually monitoring the environment, locked forward, pinpointing something specific. Justice? Chen's voice held a question. He'd learned to trust his partner's instincts implicitly. Dogs perceived the world in ways humans couldn't, through scent molecules invisible to the eye, through subtle changes in air pressure and electromagnetic fields. When justice indicated something, there was always a reason. The German Shepherd pulled more insistently toward a partially open door marked Victim Advocate Services, Room 247. "Easy boy," Chen said, but he followed the dog's lead. Justice wasn't trained in medical alert, wasn't supposed to detect emotional distress, yet something had clearly captured his attention. His nose twitched rapidly, processing information, and a soft whine escaped his throat, a sound Chen had rarely heard from the normally stoic dog. Through the narrow opening, Chen could see into the room. A woman in professional attire was gathering papers from a desk. Another woman, younger, with tired eyes, was lifting a small child from an oversized chair, but it was the child who held Justice's complete attention. The little girl was tiny, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She wore a pink dress that seemed too cheerful for the absolute emptiness in her expression. In her arms, she clutched a teddy bear that had clearly seen better days. But it was her eyes that struck Chen. They were open but unseeing, present but absent, alive but somehow vacant. Justice whined again, louder this time, and pawed at Chen's leg, a clear signal that something was wrong. "Can I help you, officer?" The woman holding the folders, Patricia Gomez, according to the nameplate on the desk, looked up with a mixture of irritation and stress. "We're actually just leaving for a court proceeding." "Sorry to interrupt," Chen started to say, preparing to move on, but Justice had other plans. The German Shepherd pulled forward with surprising strength, not aggressive but utterly determined. Chen, caught off guard, stumbled slightly as Justice pushed through the partially open door. "Justice, heel," he commanded, but the dog ignored him, something that almost never happened. Justice walked directly toward the little girl, his movements slow and deliberate, his body language completely non-threatening. His tail lowered to a gentle wag, his ears softened, and his eyes locked onto the child with an intensity that made everyone in the room freeze. "Oh my God, get that dog away from her." Janet Rodriguez instinctively stepped backward, pulling Emma behind her protectively. "Wait," Patricia said, her hand shooting up. Something in the dog's demeanor, in the way he approached with such careful gentleness, made her pause. "Wait just a second." Chen moved to retrieve Justice, but the dog had already reached the child. And then something extraordinary happened. Emma, who had been a limp doll in Janet's arms, suddenly stiffened. Her head, which had been tilted downward in its usual position, slowly lifted. Her eyes, those empty brown eyes that had stared at nothing for 42 days, focused. She was looking at Justice. "My God," Janet whispered, she's actually looking at something." Patricia fumbled for her notebook, her hands shaking. She documented every moment of Emma's case, every failed attempt at engagement, every dead-end therapy session. This was the first time, the very first time, Emma had shown any awareness of her surroundings beyond basic biological functions. Justice sat, his training evident even in this unusual moment. He didn't jump on the child, didn't invade her space aggressively. He simply sat 3 feet away and waited. His tail wagged slowly back and forth, his mouth slightly open in what Chen called his friendly face, his eyes gentle and patient. Emma's arms loosened their death grip on the teddy bear. Her lips, chapped from weeks of minimal water intake, parted slightly. Janet felt the child's body weight shift, felt her try to move forward. "Let her go," Patricia whispered urgently. "Janet, let her go." "But—" "Let her go." Janet released her hold and Emma's small feet touched the floor. She stood on wobbly legs as if remembering how to support her own weight. Chen watched, transfixed, as the tiny girl took one hesitant step toward Justice. Then another. Then another. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, a living statue of patience. His training in comfort work was showing its full value. He understood instinctively that this child needed gentleness, needed safety, needed something that had been absent from her world for too long. Emma reached out with one small hand, her fingers trembling in the air between them. Justice's nose lifted slightly, scenting her hand, and his tail wagged a bit faster, encouraging her. "Officer," Patricia breathed, barely able to form words, "what is your dog's name?" Chen, his throat tight with unexpected emotion, answered quietly, "Justice. His name is Justice." Emma's fingertips made contact with the soft fur of Justice's head, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Something was happening, something profound, something that transcended policy and procedure and protocol. Something was waking up inside a little girl who everyone had thought was lost forever. Time seemed to suspend itself in room 247. Emma's small hand rested on Justice's head, her fingers curled gently into his soft fur. The German Shepherd didn't move, didn't even twitch, as if he understood that any sudden motion might shatter this fragile moment. Patricia Gomez stood frozen with her files clutched against her chest, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Janet Rodriguez had one hand pressed against her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. Officer Michael Chen remained at attention near the doorway, his training warring with his instinct to document what was happening, to somehow preserve this impossible breakthrough. Emma's fingers moved slowly through Justice's coat, exploring the texture as if rediscovering the sensation of touch itself. The dog's fur was thick and soft, still carrying the faint scent of the special shampoo used at the K9 facility. Her other hand, still clutching the blood-stained teddy bear, gradually loosened its grip. Justice's brown eyes tracked Emma's movements with remarkable intelligence. Chen had seen his partner work with dozens of traumatized witnesses, children who'd witnessed domestic violence, elderly victims of home invasions, assault survivors struggling to testify. But he'd never seen Justice respond quite like this. The dog's entire body radiated a gentle calmness, a patient understanding that transcended his training. Emma took another step closer, and then another, until she stood directly in front of the sitting German Shepherd. At 3 years old, she was almost at eye level with the dog. Her empty gaze began to shift, to focus, to actually see what was in front of her rather than whatever horror played on endless repeat in her traumatized mind. "Good boy, Justice," Chen whispered, barely audible. "Good boy, stay." The dog's tail swished once across the linoleum floor in acknowledgement, but he remained otherwise motionless. Emma's hand moved from Justice's head down to his neck, feeling the strength in his muscles, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Her small palm rested against his chest, where she could undoubtedly feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. So different from the last heartbeat she'd felt, trapped in that car, her father's chest going still beneath her small hand. Then something shifted in Emma's expression. Her eyebrows drew together slightly, the first facial expression anyone had seen from her in 6 weeks. It wasn't quite recognition, but it was something adjacent to it, something stirring in the depths of her locked-away memories. Justice, sensing the change, made a soft sound in his throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a whimper, a gentle vocalization that seemed designed to communicate comfort. Emma's head tilted slightly, that universal gesture of a child trying to understand something just beyond their grasp. "She's responding," Patricia whispered to Janet. "Oh my God, she's actually responding. We need to," but her words died as Emma's other hand released the teddy bear entirely. The worn toy fell to the floor with a soft thump, and Emma brought both hands to Justice's face. She cupped the dog's muzzle gently, her small palms on either side of his head, and stared directly into his eyes. Chen had taught Justice to maintain eye contact with handlers and trusted individuals, but this was different. The child and the dog were engaged in some kind of wordless communication that defied explanation. Tears began to form in Emma's eyes, the first tears since the funeral where she'd stood silent and dry-eyed beside her parents' closed caskets. A single tear rolled down her left cheek, then her right. Her chin trembled. Her small body began to shake. "Should I?" Janet started forward, maternal instinct overriding caution. "No," Chen said quietly but firmly. "Let Justice work." The German shepherd seemed to understand that Emma was approaching an emotional precipice. He slowly leaned forward, closing the small gap between them, and gently pressed his nose against Emma's chest. It was a gesture of complete trust, complete acceptance. The dog was making himself vulnerable to this tiny, broken child, offering himself as an anchor. Emma's arms wrapped around Justice's neck. The movement was sudden but not violent, more like someone grabbing a life preserver in dark water. She buried her face in the dog's fur, her small body curling against his larger, solid form. And then the tears came in earnest. Not the quiet, dignified crying of a funeral, but the raw, anguished sobs of a 3-year-old who'd been holding her grief in a locked box for 42 days. Her entire body shook with the force of it. She cried into Justice's fur, her fingers gripping his coat like he might disappear if she let go. The dog absorbed it all, remaining steady and calm, occasionally shifting his weight slightly to better support the child's weight against him. Janet covered her mouth with both hands, her own tears flowing freely. Patricia set down her files and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Chen felt his throat tighten, his professional detachment crumbling in the face of such raw emotion. The crying continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes. Emma's sobs gradually quieted from wails to whimpers to hitching breaths. Justice never moved, never pulled away, never showed any sign of discomfort or impatience. He simply existed as a warm, living, steady presence that asked nothing and offered everything. Finally, Emma pulled back slightly, her face red and blotchy, her nose running, her eyes swollen from tears. But those eyes, those empty, vacant eyes that had stared at nothing for weeks, were different now. There was something in them. Pain, yes, grief, absolutely, but also awareness, presence, life. Justice licked her face once, a gentle swipe of his tongue across her cheek that made Emma's breath catch. She stared at him, her small chest still heaving with residual sobs, and her lips moved. No sound came out, but her lips definitely moved, forming shapes, trying to remember how to make words. Patricia took a careful step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, Emma, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The little girl's eyes flickered toward Patricia, acknowledging her for the first time. Recognition flashed across her face. She knew this woman, the one who'd sat with her through medical appointments and therapy sessions. "Emma," Patricia continued, her professional training battling with her overwhelming emotion, "do you know where you are?" Emma's gaze moved around the room, taking in Janet, Officer Chen, the institutional furniture. Her arms remained draped around Justice's neck, as if the dog were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Her lips moved again, and this time the faintest whisper emerged, so quiet that Chen had to lean forward to hear it. "Court," she breathed, one word, one single precious word. Patricia's hand flew to her chest. "Yes, yes, Emma, you're at the courthouse. Do you remember why?" Emma's face contorted, and for a moment it looked like she might retreat back into silence. But Justice shifted, pressing his head more firmly against her chest, and she held on to him. "Judge," she whispered, "another word, decide." The adults exchanged shocked glances. She understood. Despite the trauma, despite the silence, somewhere inside that small body, Emma Martinez had been processing everything. She knew what was happening today. She knew her future was being decided. Janet knelt beside Emma and Justice, her voice trembling. "Emma, baby, can you tell us what you need, what you want?" The little girl looked at Justice, then back at the adults. Her next words came out fragmented, disconnected, but they were words nonetheless, precious, beautiful words. "Daddies," she started, then stopped, her face scrunching with concentration. Her small hand patted Justice's head and she tried again. "Daddies." "Take your time, sweetheart," Patricia encouraged, pulling out her phone to check the time. They had 7 minutes before Judge Morrison expected them in the courtroom. Emma took a shuddering breath, her eyes locked on Justice's intelligent face. And then she spoke the two words that would change everything. Emma's lips trembled as she looked into Justice's deep brown eyes. Her small hand moved from his head down to rest against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath her palm. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, as if he understood the magnitude of what was happening, as if he knew that this tiny, broken child was fighting her way back from a dark place. "Daddies," Emma whispered again, her voice cracking with effort. The word hung in the air, unfinished, pregnant with meaning that no one in the room could yet comprehend. Patricia Gomez took a careful step closer, her phone still in her hand showing 8:53 a.m. Judge Morrison expected them at 9:00 a.m. sharp. But in this moment, courthouse schedules seemed irrelevant. History was being made in room 247. "Daddy's what, sweetheart?" Patricia asked gently, lowering herself to Emma's level. "Can you tell us?" Officer Chen felt his heart hammering in his chest. He'd been a police officer for 8 years, had seen his share of dramatic moments, but nothing, compared to watching this traumatized child claw her way back to speech. Justice's ears twitched slightly, his attention divided between Emma and his handler, as if asking permission to continue. Emma's face scrunched with concentration. Speaking was an act of immense bravery for someone who'd been silent for so long, someone who'd used silence as armor against unbearable pain. Her mouth opened and closed several times, forming the shapes of words she couldn't quite vocalize. Then her eyes locked onto Justice's collar, the official Denver Police Department K-9 collar with its badge and identification tags. Her small fingers reached out, touching the metal badge, tracing the engraved letters she couldn't yet read but somehow recognized. "Daddies," she tried once more, and then, as if breaking through an invisible barrier, the second word tumbled out. "Dog." The room went absolutely silent. "Daddy's dog," Emma repeated, stronger this time, her voice gaining substance. She looked up at the adults with eyes that suddenly held desperate urgency, as if she needed them to understand something critically important. "Daddy's dog." Janet's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Patricia's eyes went wide, her mind immediately racing through the implications. Chen felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Daddy's dog. Not a dog or nice dog, but Daddy's dog, possessive, specific, meaningful. "Emma," Patricia said, her voice shaking slightly as she set down her phone and grabbed her briefcase, frantically searching for the case file. "Emma, honey, are you saying your daddy had a dog?" Emma nodded vigorously, the most animated movement anyone had seen from her since the accident. Her arms tightened around Justice's neck, and she pressed her face against his fur again. "Daddy's dog," she said into his coat, muffled but clear. "Ranger, Daddy's dog, Ranger." The name hit the room like a thunderbolt. Patricia's hands shook as she flipped through the thick file, pages flying past, medical reports, psychological evaluations, family history documentation. There was something. I remember reading something. She muttered to herself, her finger scanning lines of text at lightning speed. Chen's mind was reeling. Ranger. That name was familiar. He'd heard it before in the break room at the station, in passing conversations with other K-9 officers. Ranger had been. "Oh my God," Patricia breathed, her fingers stopping on a page buried deep in the family history section. "Oh my God, oh my God." "What?" Janet demanded, moving closer. "What is it?" Patricia looked up, her face pale with shock and something like awe. Detective Ricardo Martinez, Emma's father. He was a K-9 officer with Denver PD for 7 years before transferring to administration. His partner was a German shepherd named Ranger who retired from active duty 8 months ago due to hip dysplasia. The words hung in the air, their significance slowly sinking in. Chen felt the world tilt slightly. "Ranger," he said slowly. "I know that name. Ranger was partnered with Detective Martinez in the gang unit before I joined the K-9 division." He looked down at Justice, then at Emma. They were legendary, best narcotics team in the department for 3 years running. Emma pulled back from Justice, her tear-stained face suddenly animated with an emotion that transcended her 3 years, a desperate need to be understood, to make the adults comprehend something vital. "Daddy's dog," she said again, louder now, pointing at Justice. "Like Daddy's dog." "She thinks Justice is Ranger," Janet said, understanding dawning. She sees Justice and she's remembering her father's K-9 partner. But Patricia was shaking her head, still staring at the file, her finger moving across the page. "It's more than that. Look at this. Ranger was acquired from House Kaufmann Kennels in Germany, imported in 2017. Justice, where did Justice come from?" Chen's breath caught. House Kaufmann. Justice came from the same breeder, imported in 2021. They could be. He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood the implication. "Related," Patricia finished. "They could literally be related. Same breeding program, similar physical characteristics, probably similar temperament and training aptitude." Emma wasn't listening to the adults anymore. She was completely focused on Justice, running her small hands over his face, his ears, his neck, as if trying to reconcile memory with reality. "Ranger," she whispered to the dog. "Where's Ranger? Where's Daddy?" And just like that, the fragile breakthrough threatened to shatter. Emma's face crumpled, the reality of her situation crashing back over her. "Want Daddy," she said, her voice rising. "Want Daddy, want Ranger, want Mommy." The words came faster now, pouring out after weeks of silence, each one laced with anguish. "Daddy, Daddy." Justice whined, a sound of distress Chen had rarely heard from his partner. The dog pressed himself against Emma, trying to provide comfort, but the child's grief was a tidal wave that couldn't be stopped. "Daddy's not coming back," Emma wailed, the truth she'd been unable to process finally breaking through in words. "Daddy's gone. Mommy's gone." Her small fists pounded against Justice's side, not hard enough to hurt, but with the desperate frustration of a child who'd lost everything. Janet reached for her, but Patricia held up a hand. "Let her get it out," she whispered. "She needs to get it out." Emma's cries echoed off the institutional walls of room 247, 42 days of suppressed grief finally finding voice. Justice lay down, making himself smaller, and Emma collapsed against him, her body racked with sobs. "Want Daddy," she kept repeating, over and over. "Want Daddy's dog. Want to go home." Chen felt his own eyes burning with tears. In his 8 years of service, he'd delivered death notifications. He'd secured crime scenes involving children. He'd seen tragedy in countless forms. But watching this tiny girl finally break open with grief, using his own partner as an anchor to reality, was almost more than he could bear. Patricia checked her phone again. 8:57 a.m. 3 minutes until they were due in Judge Morrison's courtroom where Emma's future would be decided. Except now everything had changed. Emma had spoken. Emma had remembered. Emma had made a connection that no one had documented, no psychologist had uncovered, no family member had mentioned. Detective Ricardo Martinez had been a K-9 officer. His partner had been a German shepherd named Ranger. And his daughter, traumatized into silence, had just broken through that silence because of another German shepherd who might share bloodlines with her father's partner. "We need to tell the judge," Janet said, still watching Emma cry against justice. "This changes everything." "It changes more than you know," Chen said quietly. He knelt beside Emma and Justice, his hand resting on his partner's back. "Emma, can you look at me?" The little girl's tear-swollen eyes turned toward him. "Your daddy was a hero," Chen said softly. "He was one of the best K-9 officers Denver ever had, and Ranger was his partner, his friend. I didn't know your daddy personally, but every officer in the department knew about Detective Martinez and Ranger." Emma's crying quieted slightly, her attention caught by this stranger who spoke about her father with respect and knowledge. "Justice here," Chen continued. "He's a lot like Ranger. They might even be family, like cousins. And I think maybe your daddy would be happy that Justice is here with you today." Emma's small hand reached out and grasped Chen's sleeve. "Find Ranger," she whispered, hope and desperation mingling in her voice. "Find Daddy's dog." Chen's throat tightened. He looked at Patricia, then at Janet, then back at this brave little girl who just fought her way back from the edge of complete psychological shutdown. "I'll try," he promised. "I'll try to find Ranger." Patricia's phone alarm went off. 9:00 a.m. "We need to go," she said. "Judge Morrison is waiting." Patricia Gomez's mind raced as she hurried down the corridor toward courtroom 6, her heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. Behind her, Janet Rodriguez carried Emma, who refused to let go of Officer Chen's sleeve, forcing him and Justice to accompany them. The procession drew stares from attorneys and courthouse staff, a social worker with flying papers, a foster mother with a crying child, and a police officer with a German shepherd moving through the family court wing like a small tornado. "I need 5 minutes with the judge before we start," Patricia said over her shoulder. "This changes the entire case profile." "Judge Morrison doesn't like delays," Janet warned, adjusting Emma's weight on her hip. The little girl had her face buried in Janet's shoulder but kept one hand extended behind her, fingers twisted in Justice's collar, as if terrified the dog might disappear. "Too bad," Patricia said with uncharacteristic sharpness. "Emma just spoke for the first time in 6 weeks. That's not a minor development, that's a complete game changer." They reached the courtroom doors where a bailiff stood checking his watch with obvious irritation. "You're 4 minutes late. Judge Morrison is." "I need an emergency sidebar," Patricia interrupted. "Right now, before anything else happens." The bailiff, a veteran of 20 years who'd seen every possible courtroom drama, took one look at the unusual group, particularly at Emma's tear-stained face and the police dog, and nodded slowly. "Wait here." He disappeared inside. Chen knelt beside Emma, who was still clutching Justice's collar. "Hey, Emma," he said gently. "Justice and I need to wait out here while you go inside, okay? But we'll be right outside this door. I promise." "No," Emma's voice was sharp with panic. Her grip tightened on the dog's collar. "No, need Daddy's dog." Justice whined and pressed his nose against Emma's leg, his training and instincts working in perfect harmony to provide comfort. The dog seemed to understand that this child needed him in ways that transcended his official duties. Patricia was frantically texting on her phone while simultaneously balancing her briefcase and file folders. "I'm messaging the office. We need everything, every document related to Detective Martinez's service record, his K-9 partnership, retirement records for Ranger, everything." Janet shifted Emma's weight again. "Patricia, what are you thinking? How does this affect the custody decision?" "I don't know yet," Patricia admitted, still typing. But Emma's breakthrough came through a connection to her father's career, his K-9 partner. That suggests a deep attachment to her father's world, his work, his life in Denver. It's psychological evidence of where her roots are, where her sense of safety and identity might be anchored. The bailiff returned. Judge Morrison will see Ms. Gomez in chambers. Everyone else waits here. Patricia handed her briefcase to Janet and kept only the case file. If my assistant Carla calls, answer it. I need whatever information she finds. She disappeared through the courtroom doors, leaving the others in the hallway. Inside Judge Morrison's chambers, Patricia found both legal teams already assembled. Sarah Chen's attorney, Marcus Webb, stood with his arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the delay. Miguel Martinez's attorney, Lisa Cordova, looked curious but guarded, and Judge Helena Morrison sat behind her desk with the expression of someone whose patience was wearing thin. "Ms. Gomez," the judge said coolly, "you're late and apparently you've brought a police dog to my courthouse. Explain." Patricia took a breath and launched into the most important summary of her career. "Your Honor, 3 minutes ago, Emma Martinez spoke for the first time since the accident that killed her parents 6 weeks ago. The breakthrough occurred when she encountered a Denver PD K-9 named Justice. We've just discovered that Emma's father, Detective Ricardo Martinez, was a K-9 officer for 7 years. His partner was a German Shepherd named Ranger, who retired 8 months ago." Marcus Webb interrupted. "Your Honor, while we're sympathetic to the child's trauma, this seems like a dramatic tangent. The custody hearing," Patricia cut him off, "is about determining what's in Emma's best interest. 5 minutes ago, that child looked at a German Shepherd and said, 'Daddy's dog.' She recognized characteristics that reminded her of her father's K-9 partner. She then spoke multiple sentences, something no psychiatrist, therapist, or family member has been able to achieve in 42 days. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "You're saying the dog triggered her speech?" "More than that, Your Honor. The dog triggered a memory connection to her father's profession, his daily life, his identity as a K-9 officer. Emma didn't just see a dog, she saw a link to who her father was, what he did, the world he inhabited in Denver." Lisa Cordova, Miguel Martinez's attorney, spoke up. "Your Honor, if I may, this directly supports our position. Miguel Martinez is a Denver firefighter. He worked alongside his brother in emergency services. He represents continuity with Ricardo's professional world, the community where Ricardo was known and respected." "This is absurd," Marcus Webb protested. "You're suggesting we base a custody decision on a child's reaction to a dog. Sarah Chen can provide stability, education, family support." "I'm suggesting," Patricia said firmly, "that we base our decision on new evidence about Emma's psychological state and what environment might facilitate her healing. When I walked into that victim advocate's office this morning, Emma Martinez was functionally catatonic. Now she's speaking, crying, expressing needs. That transformation happened because of a connection to her father's world as a K-9 officer in Denver." Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Finally, she spoke. "I want to see the child. Bring her in with the dog." "Your Honor," Marcus Webb looked horrified, "a police dog in family court." "Justice is certified in victim assistance and courthouse comfort work," Patricia said quickly. "I can have Officer Chen provide documentation." "Fine," Judge Morrison said, standing. "We'll convene in the courtroom. Ms. Gomez, bring the child and the dog. Counsel, prepare your clients. I want to observe Emma's behavior and hear whatever she's willing to say. This court has always prioritized the voice of the child when possible, and if a police dog makes that possible, then so be it." Patricia hurried back to the hallway, where she found Janet on the phone and Chen trying to keep Justice calm while Emma clung to his collar. "The judge wants to see her, with Justice." Chen's eyes widened. "In the courtroom, ma'am, Justice is trained for this, but can he do it? Can he remain calm and controlled in a courtroom environment with multiple people?" Yes, Chen said without hesitation. But I need to brief him and I need to stay with him. Done, Patricia said. She knelt beside Emma. Sweetheart, we're going to go into a big room now. Justice is coming with you, okay? And Officer Chen, too. Emma's tear-stained face looked up hopefully. Daddy's dog stays. Yes, honey, Justice stays with you. Janet ended her call, her face pale. That was your office. They found Ranger. Everyone froze. What? Patricia breathed. Ranger, Ricardo Martinez's K-9 partner. He's alive. He's living with a retired officer named Frank Delgado in Aurora. Delgado was Ranger's handler before Ricardo, when Ranger first came to Denver PD. After Ranger retired due to hip dysplasia, Delgado adopted him because Ricardo had just transferred to administration and couldn't take him. Emma's head snapped up. Ranger, Daddy's Ranger. Janet nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, baby, Ranger is okay. Want to see Ranger? Emma's voice rose urgently. Want to see Daddy's dog? Patricia and Chen exchanged glances. This was becoming complicated in ways no one had anticipated. A custody case that should have been straightforward, aunt versus uncle, was now entangled with K-9 officers, retired police dogs, and a traumatized child's unexpected breakthrough. One thing at a time, Patricia said, though her mind was already racing ahead. If Ranger could be brought to Emma, if that connection could be reestablished, what might it mean for her healing? And more importantly, what might it mean for the custody decision? The courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff gestured them forward. Judge Morrison is ready. Chen attached Justice's official courthouse vest, a bright blue covering that identified him as a working comfort animal. He gave the dog a series of hand signals, and Justice's demeanor shifted into complete professional mode. Ready, partner, Chen whispered. Justice's tail wagged once. Emma reached out with both hands, one grasping Janet's shirt, the other resting on Justice's back. Daddy's dog goes with me, she said, her voice small but certain. Daddy's dog keeps me safe. And with those words, they walked into the courtroom where Emma's future would be decided, accompanied by an unexpected four-legged guardian who had already changed everything. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Emma Martinez entered, flanked by her unusual entourage. Every head turned to watch the small procession. Janet Rodriguez carrying the little girl, Officer Michael Chen in full uniform, and Justice, the German shepherd, walking with professional dignity at Chen's side. Emma's hand remained firmly planted on the dog's back, her fingers twisted in his blue courthouse comfort vest. Sarah Chen, Emma's maternal aunt, sat at the plaintiff's table in an expensive navy suit, her perfectly styled hair and composed expression cracking as she saw her niece actually moving, actually aware. Beside her, attorney Marcus Webb shuffled his carefully prepared notes, clearly thrown by this unexpected development. His entire argument had been predicated on Emma's inability to express preference or attachment. At the defense table, Miguel Martinez rose slowly to his feet. The firefighter's broad shoulders strained against his dress shirt, clearly borrowed or rarely worn. His eyes, red-rimmed from weeks of grief and stress, widened as he saw Emma look around the room with actual cognizance. When her gaze passed over him, something like hope flickered across his weathered face. "All rise," the bailiff announced unnecessarily, as Judge Helena Morrison had already entered and taken her seat at the bench. She was a woman in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She presided over family court for 15 years and had developed a reputation for unorthodox but effective methods of determining children's best interests. "Be seated," Judge Morrison said, her gaze fixed on Emma and Justice. "Ms. Gomez, bring the child forward." Patricia led the way to a position between both tables, where everyone in the courtroom could see. Janet set Emma down gently, but the little girl immediately dropped to the floor, wrapping her arms around Justice's neck. The dog sat calmly, his training evident in every controlled movement, but his eyes tracked Emma's every motion with gentle attentiveness. "For the record," Judge Morrison said, "we have an unusual situation. Emma Martinez, the subject of these custody proceedings, has apparently broken her traumatic silence this morning through interaction with this K-9 officer. Officer Chen, Your Honor. Officer Michael Chen, Denver Police Department, K-9 Unit. This is Justice, badge number K-947. He's certified in both security operations and victim assistance." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "And you believe your dog can help facilitate communication with Emma during these proceedings?" "I believe," Chen said carefully, "that justice has already done what 6 weeks of professional intervention could not. Emma is speaking, Your Honor. She's present, aware, and responsive when justice is near her." Marcus Webb stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I must object to this entire proceeding. While we're all grateful for any improvement in Emma's condition, bringing a police dog into custody deliberations is highly irregular. It could be seen as influencing the child's responses or it could be seen as finally giving this child a voice in her own future," Lisa Cordova interrupted, also standing. "Your Honor, Miguel Martinez has been fighting for the right to raise his niece in her father's city, in the community where Ricardo Martinez served with distinction. The fact that Emma responded to a K-9 officer, a direct link to her father's profession, speaks volumes about where her attachments and sense of safety lie." "This is manipulation," Webb protested. "You can't possibly base a custody decision on a child's reaction to a dog." Judge Morrison's hand came down sharply on her gavel. "Counsel, enough. I'll determine what's relevant to my decision." She turned her attention to Emma, who was pressed against Justice's side, watching the adults argue with wide, frightened eyes. "Emma," Judge Morrison said, her voice softening considerably, "my name is Judge Morrison. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma nodded slowly, her fingers digging deeper into Justice's vest. "Can you tell me why?" "Decide where I live," Emma whispered, barely audible. Justice shifted closer to her, and she found her voice growing slightly stronger. "Aunt Sarah or Uncle Miguel?" A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. Sarah Chen pressed a tissue to her eyes. Miguel Martinez gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "That's right," Judge Morrison said gently. "And Emma, I want to make the best decision for you. Can you help me understand what you need?" Emma looked at Justice, then at Officer Chen, then back at the judge. Her small face was a battlefield of emotions, fear, grief, confusion, but also something new, determination. "Need Daddy's dog," she said clearly. "Need to find Ranger." "Who's Ranger, sweetie?" "Daddy's dog, Daddy's partner. Where's Ranger?" Emma's voice rose with urgency, and Justice whined softly, pressing his head against her chest. Patricia stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may explain. We've just learned that Ranger, Detective Martinez's K-9 partner, was retired 8 months ago due to medical issues and is currently living with a former handler in Aurora. Emma has expressed a strong desire to see the dog." Judge Morrison sat back in her chair, processing this information. The courtroom remained silent, everyone waiting for her response. Finally, she leaned forward. "Officer Chen, in your professional opinion as a K-9 handler, what would be the impact on Emma if she were to be reunited with her father's K-9 partner?" Chen chose his words carefully. "Your Honor, K-9 partnerships create bonds that extend to the officer's family. The dogs often live with their handlers, interact daily with their children. For Emma, Ranger wouldn't just be her father's work partner. He'd be a family member, someone who knew her father intimately, who carries his scent, his memory. The psychological benefit could be significant. And if Emma were moved to Boston, away from Denver, away from the possibility of maintaining contact with Ranger, it could be seen as losing another piece of her father," Chen said quietly. "Another loss on top of catastrophic loss." Sarah Chen stood suddenly, her composure finally breaking. "Your Honor, I loved my sister more than anything. I want what's best for Emma, but I didn't know about Ricardo's K9 work. I didn't understand." Her voice cracked. "I live in Boston. Emma would be far from her father's world, his colleagues, his legacy." Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, but Sarah shook it off. "No, Marcus, look at her. Really look at her." She gestured toward Emma, who was now sitting cross-legged beside Justice, her small hand resting on his paw. "She's been silent for 6 weeks, and a dog that reminds her of her father brings her back. What does that tell us?" Miguel Martinez was crying openly now, his large hands covering his face. Lisa Cordova put a hand on his shoulder. Judge Morrison surveyed the courtroom, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. Emma's physical proximity to Justice, her heightened awareness compared to the psychological reports, the genuine emotion from both family members. "I'm going to make an unprecedented ruling," Judge Morrison announced. "These proceedings will pause for 48 hours. Ms. Gomez, I want you to arrange for Emma to meet with Ranger, her father's K9 partner. I want a full report from the encounter, how she responds, what she says, how it affects her psychological state. Officer Chen, I'd like you and Justice to be present during that meeting." "Your Honor," Marcus Webb objected. "Overruled. This court has always maintained that the voice of the child, when possible, should be central to custody decisions. Emma is giving us that voice, and I intend to listen. We'll reconvene in 2 days with additional information." She looked at Emma again. "Young lady, would you like to see your daddy's dog? Would you like to see Ranger?" Emma stood up, using Justice's back for support. Her voice, when it came, was the loudest anyone had heard from her since the accident. "Yes, yes, please. Want to see Daddy's Ranger." Judge Morrison smiled, a rare expression in her courtroom. "Then that's what we'll arrange. This hearing is adjourned until Friday at 9 a.m. The gavel came down, but no one moved. Everyone was still watching Emma, who had turned to Officer Chen with an expression of desperate hope. "Promise," she whispered. "Promise I see Daddy's dog." Chen knelt beside her, Justice pressing against them both. "I promise, Emma. I'll make sure you see Ranger." And for the first time since her parents died, Emma Martinez smiled. 2 days later, the hallway outside courtroom 6 buzzed with an energy that was equal parts anticipation and tension. Patricia Gomez stood near the window, reviewing her notes for what felt like the 100th time. The meeting with Ranger had exceeded every expectation, and the video footage on her tablet showed a transformation that still brought tears to her eyes even after watching it repeatedly. Janet Rodriguez sat on a bench, Emma curled up beside her, but this was a different child from the one who'd entered the courthouse 48 hours earlier. Emma was animated, talking in whispered bursts about Ranger's soft ears and how Ranger remembered Daddy's smell on my shirt. She wore a pink dress Janet had finally gotten her to choose herself that morning, and in her lap she held a photograph Frank Delgado had given her. Detective Ricardo Martinez kneeling beside Ranger, both of them looking at the camera with matching expressions of pride and joy. Officer Chen arrived with Justice, and Emma immediately jumped down to greet the German Shepherd. "Justice, we saw Ranger. Ranger remembered me." Chen smiled, his heart warming at the sight of this child who'd been a silent ghost now bubbling with words. "I heard, Emma. Officer Delgado sent me pictures. Ranger looks like a very good dog." "The best," Emma said seriously. "Like Daddy said, Daddy always said Ranger was the best partner." She paused, her smile fading slightly. "Ranger's old now. His back legs don't work good, but he remembered my smell. He licked my face and made his happy sound, the one Daddy said meant Ranger was really, really happy." The meeting had taken place at Frank Delgado's home in Aurora, a modest ranch house with a large backyard. Patricia, Janet, Officer Chen with Justice, and both legal teams had witnessed it. The moment Ranger, a graying German Shepherd with a grizzled muzzle and cloudy eyes, had scented Emma, the old dog had struggled to his feet, his arthritic hips protesting, and hobbled toward her with single-minded determination. Emma had frozen for just a moment, then whispered Ranger, in a voice filled with wonder and pain. The old dog had reached her and collapsed at her feet, his tail thumping against the ground as he pressed his nose against her stomach, her chest, her face, relearning her scent, confirming what his aging senses told him. This was his officer's daughter. This was family. Emma had spent 2 hours sitting in Frank Delgado's backyard with Ranger's head in her lap, talking to the dog in a steady stream about her daddy. Remember when Daddy gave you the special treats? Remember when you caught the bad man at the warehouse? Daddy told me that story lots of times. Remember when you slept in my room when I was scared of thunder? The adults had watched, many of them crying, as a traumatized child used an aging K9 to process her grief, to reconnect with memories of her father, to find her voice through the physical presence of her father's partner. Now, standing outside the courtroom, Emma looked up at Patricia with serious eyes. "Will the judge let me see Ranger again?" "That depends on where you live, sweetheart," Patricia said gently. "If you live with Uncle Miguel in Denver, you could visit Ranger regularly. If you live with Aunt Sarah in Boston, it would be much harder." Emma's face clouded with concentration. At 3 years old, understanding the full implications of geography was beyond her, but she grasped the essential truth. Denver meant Ranger. Boston meant losing Ranger, like she'd lost Daddy and Mommy. The courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff gestured them inside. "Judge Morrison is ready." This time, the procession into the courtroom felt less shocking, more purposeful. Emma walked between Officer Chen and Janet, one hand on Justice's vest, the other clutching her photograph of her father and Ranger. Her small chin was raised, her steps determined. Judge Morrison was already at the bench, and her expression was unreadable as she watched Emma enter. Sarah Chen sat at the plaintiff's table, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed. She'd spent the past 2 days soul-searching, talking with her husband, her children, trying to reconcile her love for her niece with the growing realization that love alone wasn't enough. Miguel Martinez looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His dress shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly crooked, but his eyes were clear and focused entirely on Emma. "Ms. Gomez," Judge Morrison began without preamble, "I've reviewed your report on Emma's meeting with Ranger, including the video footage. I'd like to hear from Emma directly if she's willing. Emma, can you come up here and talk to me?" Emma looked at Officer Chen, who nodded encouragingly. She walked slowly toward the judge's bench, Justice padding beside her without being asked. The dog had bonded with this child in a way that transcended his training. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her stern courtroom demeanor softening. "Emma, I understand you met your daddy's dog, Ranger. Can you tell me about that?" Emma's voice was quiet but steady. "Ranger remembered me. He's old now and his legs hurt, but he remembered my smell. Mr. Frank said Ranger hasn't been happy since Daddy died, but when he saw me, his tail wagged really fast." "How did it make you feel to see Ranger?" Emma's small hands twisted together. Like Daddy was a little bit still here. Ranger smells like Daddy. He knows all the stories. When I told him about the time Daddy caught the bad guys at the big building, Ranger's ears went up like he remembered. Tears began sliding down her cheeks. Ranger misses Daddy too. The courtroom was absolutely silent. "Emma," Judge Morrison said gently, "if you could choose, would you want to see Ranger again?" "Yes," the word burst out of Emma with desperate intensity. "Yes, please, Ranger needs me now. Mr. Frank says Ranger's been sad. I can make him happy. I can tell him Daddy's stories. I can." Her voice broke. "I don't want Ranger to be alone." Judge Morrison's eyes moved to Sarah Chen, who had tears streaming down her face. Then to Miguel Martinez, who was openly crying. "Your Honor," Sarah Chen stood suddenly, her voice shaking. "I need to say something." Marcus Webb grabbed her arm. "Sarah, don't." "No," Sarah said firmly, pulling away. She walked around the table and knelt in front of Emma, taking the little girl's hands. "Emma, sweetheart, I love you so much. I loved your mommy, my baby sister, more than anything in the world. I wanted to take care of you because I thought that's what she would want." Emma stared at her aunt with wide eyes. "But watching you with Ranger, watching you come alive when you talk about your daddy's work, his world," Sarah's voice cracked. "You belong here in Denver with your Uncle Miguel near Ranger, near everything that keeps your daddy's memory alive." She looked up at Judge Morrison. "Your Honor, I'm withdrawing my petition for custody." The courtroom erupted. Marcus Webb was on his feet protesting. Lisa Cordova looked shocked. Miguel Martinez buried his face in his hands. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. "Order, Ms. Chen, do you understand what you're saying?" "Yes," Sarah said, still holding Emma's hands. "I understand that love means putting Emma's needs first. She needs her father's world. She needs Ranger. She needs Denver." She pulled Emma into a hug. "I'll visit all the time, sweetheart. I'll call every week, but Uncle Miguel should be the one raising you." Emma's arms wrapped around her aunt's neck. "You can come see Ranger too," she whispered. "Ranger would like you. Daddy would want Ranger to know Mommy's family." Judge Morrison removed her glasses and wiped her eyes, something no one in her courtroom had ever seen. "Well," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that makes my decision considerably easier." Judge Helena Morrison's voice rang clear and steady through courtroom 6. "After reviewing all evidence, testimony, and the extraordinary circumstances that have unfolded over the past 48 hours, I hereby grant full custody of Emma Martinez to her paternal uncle, Miguel Antonio Martinez, effective immediately." The gavel came down with finality, but this time the sound felt less like judgment and more like benediction. Miguel Martinez stood slowly, his large frame shaking with emotion. He walked toward Emma with hesitant steps, as if afraid she might disappear like smoke. Emma looked up at him, this uncle she barely knew, this man who shared her father's eyes and squared jaw, and something in her small face shifted from uncertainty to recognition. "You look like Daddy," she whispered. Miguel dropped to his knees, bringing himself to her level. "Your daddy was my big brother, my hero." His voice was rough with tears. "I promise you, Emma, I will spend every day trying to be half the man Ricardo was." Emma studied him for a long moment, then reached out and touched the badge Miguel wore on a chain around his neck, his firefighter's badge, worn openly today as a promise of who he was. "Daddy said firefighters and police are family. He said Uncle Miguel saves people." "I try," Miguel said. "And now I get to take care of the most important person in the world, my brother's daughter." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Miguel caught her, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. Justice pressed against them both, his tail wagging slowly, and Emma reached down with one hand to keep contact with the dog who'd started this miracle. The next 3 months unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of healing. Miguel's 2-bedroom apartment became a home. He cleared out his weight room and transformed it into Emma's bedroom, painting the walls a soft purple she'd chosen herself. Ricardo's police academy graduation photo hung above her bed, and next to it, a framed picture of Ranger in his prime. Miguel's fellow firefighters from Station 19 became Emma's extended family, visiting regularly, bringing toys and books, teaching her that she was surrounded by people who'd loved her father and now loved her. But the real healing happened every Saturday. Without fail, Officer Chen would arrive at 10 a.m. with justice. They'd drive together to Frank Delgado's house in Aurora, where Ranger waited. The old German shepherd would hear the car before anyone else, his graying head lifting, his cloudy eyes brightening. By the time Emma burst through the door, Ranger would be on his feet, arthritic hips be damned, tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a puppy. "Ranger, I learned to write my name. Want to see?" Emma would drop to her knees, wrapping her arms around the old dog's neck, and Ranger would lean into her with his full weight, groaning with contentment. Frank Delgado, A retired officer in his 70s would sit on his porch with Miguel and Officer Chen, watching Emma in the backyard. She'd talk to Ranger constantly, telling him about preschool, which she'd started in October, about Uncle Miguel's firehouse, about the nightmares that were slowly becoming less frequent. "My therapist says talking to Ranger is good," Emma explained seriously one Saturday, her small hand stroking Ranger's gray muzzle. "She says Ranger knew Daddy best, so when I tell Ranger stories, it's like Daddy can hear them too." Justice would lie nearby, and the two German shepherds, one old and retired, one young and active, would exchange glances that seemed almost understanding. Emma would split her attention between them, one hand on each dog, creating a bridge between past and present. By Thanksgiving, Frank Delgado made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm moving to assisted living," he told Miguel and Emma during one of their visits. "My daughter's been on me about it for months. The stairs are getting hard and I can't give Ranger the care he needs anymore." He looked at Emma, his weathered face gentle. "I was wondering if maybe Ranger could come live with you and Uncle Miguel." Emma's eyes went wide as dinner plates. She looked at Miguel with such desperate hope that he felt his heart crack open. "I've been fixing up a place in my apartment," Miguel admitted, a smile spreading across his face. "Talked to my landlord about it last week. Got permission for a service dog. I was waiting for the right time to ask Frank." Emma screamed, a pure sound of joy that made both dogs' ears perk up, and launched herself at Miguel. "Really, really, really, Ranger can live with us." "Really, Mija," Miguel said, using the Spanish endearment his brother had used. "Ranger comes home." The transition happened over the next week. Frank visited twice to help Ranger adjust, bringing the dog's bed, his favorite toys, the collar he'd worn during his years of service with Ricardo. When Frank said his final goodbye, he knelt beside Ranger and whispered, "Take care of Ricardo's girl. That's your mission now, old friend." Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, understanding on some level deeper than words. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Emma woke at dawn, racing into the living room where Ranger slept on his orthopedic bed near the fireplace. Miguel had stayed up late setting up presents, but Emma ignored them all, dropping to the floor beside Ranger. "Merry Christmas, Ranger. Merry Christmas, Daddy," she whispered, hugging the old dog close. Miguel stood in the doorway, watching, and felt his brother's presence so strongly it was almost physical. Ricardo had given his life protecting his daughter. Now his daughter was giving Ranger a peaceful retirement, and together they were healing each other. Officer Chen visited that afternoon with Justice and a gift, a framed photograph he discovered in the police department archives. It showed Ricardo and Ranger during a commendation ceremony, both wearing medals, both looking proud and strong. Emma traced her father's face with one finger. "Daddy's watching us, right? He knows we're okay." "I think he knows," Chen said softly. "I think both your parents know you're going to be just fine." That night, Emma sat between Ranger and Miguel on the couch, a storybook in her lap. Her voice was clear and confident as she read aloud, a far cry from the silent, traumatized child of 3 months ago. Justice had returned to his regular duties, but he stopped by often. The department had recognized him with a special commendation for his role in Emma's breakthrough, though Chen always said the real hero was the little girl who'd fought her way back from darkness. Emma would start kindergarten in the fall. She'd continue therapy, continue visiting her Aunt Sarah during summer breaks, continue growing into whoever she was meant to become. The grief would never fully disappear. It would always be part of her story. But so would the healing, so would the love, so would the remarkable bond between a traumatized child and 2 German shepherds who'd helped her find her voice. As Emma drifted off to sleep that Christmas night, Ranger's head rested on her bed, his breathing slow and peaceful. In the living room, Miguel looked at his brother's photograph and made a silent promise. "I've got her, Ricardo. We all do." And in that moment, surrounded by love and the gentle presence of her father's loyal partner, Emma Martinez was finally home.